we've talked about different facets. We've discussed about different facets of bitumen throughout this day. And our next speaker is going to talk about bitumen's future supply demand scenario in the Middle East and Asia Pacific region. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ms. Mahua Chakravarty, editor, Argus Media. Well, Ms. Mahua Chakravarty has worked with Argus since 2013 and is leading the bitumen desk for Asia Pacific and Middle East markets. Prior to moving in this role, in October 2020, she was co-leading the Asian Petrochemicals desk within Argus, covering aromatics, methanol, polymers, olefins, and more. Well, she has 18 years of prolific experience, and we are so proud, happy, and honored to have you here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mahua Chakravarty with a huge round of applause. Come on.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mahua. I'm the bitumen editor for Argus for the Asia Pacific and the Middle East region. And today I would like to take you through some of these slides which cover what's really been happening in these regions through 2022, and what are some of the key takeaways that we have in terms of fundamentals, as well as what we should really expect in the rest of 2022 and the year ahead. Before we go into the market section, I'll just quickly run through with you some of the key things that we do in Argus and how we really cover the bitumen market. Argus, as you know, is really a very well-established name in the bitumen industry, and most of the markets, all the players, be it for their term contracts or their spot discussions, they are using Argus prices as very much on a day-to-day basis. And some of the key assessments or the indexes that do get used in these regions, number one that comes to mind is FOB Singapore. It is really the sole index that's used in term contracts in ASEAN region, in Oceania, in Northeast Asia, or wherever there any trading that's going on basis FOB Singapore. Following that, of course, we do have a lot of spot trading also that goes on using this index, whether on an outright basis or on a formula basis. And for FOB Korea, up in Northeast Asia, that's the major assessment there. And Hyundai Oil, among the Korean refiners, is using the Argus FOB Korea index. And some of the Chinese importers, as well as some of the key players, are also using this index. Coming to this region, FOB Iran, for bulk and drum assessments, this particular assessment is being used as a key reference because most of the trading that happens from Iran is mostly not through a lot of term contracts, but through a lot of spot business. And this particular index is heavily used. And all the destinations that Iranian volumes go to, this index is being used. And we also launched back in 2017-18 FOB Middle East Gulf. This is particularly made up of one end of FOB Bahrain prices, and the other end of the assessment is made up of a midpoint of FOB Iran bulk assessment on a Friday. A number of Middle East sellers as well as buyers in South Asia are using this particular assessment. This is, of course, the flagship publication that carries all these assessments that I talked about. And it covers not only just the Asia Pacific and the Middle East region, but also Europe, Africa, and it's issued every Friday on a weekly basis. And you can see I have taken out a snapshot of this report. The key report that covers the Asia Pacific carries the major assessments in that particular page. And there's a whole section on freight assessments, which is also used as a reference from Singapore, Bandar Abbas, South Korea to a lot of key destination markets across the region. Coming to the latest that's really been happening in terms of our coverage, we've been really working on building it up, and the Bitumen Daily was launched as part of these efforts. And we launched this report on 1st November 2021. And you can see a snapshot of the report on the left-hand side. And it carries three major assessments, which is FOB Singapore, FOB South Korea. And as of this year, in April, we also launched FOB Iran bulk assessment on a daily basis, and it's being covered from Monday to Friday in this report. And we have seen an increasing interest to refer or use these prices in spot trading. I'll just briefly touch upon what we have here. This is a screenshot of what we call the Argus Open Markets. It's really an online platform which facilitates players to go in and place bids and offers. And it's open from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Singapore time every Friday. And the two key assessments on the basis which players can place numbers are ABX1, FOB Singapore, and ABX2, FOB South Korea. So this particular platform is open between 2 to 4 p.m. on Fridays. So we have seen some key major players in the region from last year. Occasionally, they have gone in to place bids or offers. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is Puma. Then HIN, then we have GS Caltex. Some of these players have shown interest and they have placed numbers on this platform. So in case if you would like to know further on this, please do contact our team from the business development or commercial side. They would be happy to share further. Coming now to the part on the markets and what's really been happening in Asia. I'll just run through quickly on some of the key sort of facts on a global basis where really Asia-Pac stands. If you look at it, Asia-Pacific and the Middle East really make up more than 50% of global demand. It goes to up to 60 or 62% actually, if you look at the numbers. So more than half of the world's consumption is really resting in this part of the world. And total consumption is estimated at about 68 million tons. So Asia Pacific and Middle East alone consumes more than half of the global production and is also the biggest importing region in the world. Economic growth, of course, recovery has been expected and has been happening through 2022 and also into 23 and the thing is, the heartening fact is that this region also makes up a huge cluster of developing economies, which of course are expected to see faster resurgence after the past 2 years' effect of the pandemic. And in terms of supply, Asia-Pac and Middle East, it also makes up about half of the global production too. So the total capacity as of 2021 stood at about 87.1 million tons. And of course, the average operating rates was only about 70 to 75% for most of it. Northeast Asia, as you can see in that pie chart about that, Northeast Asia alone makes up about 60% of the capacity for this region, for Asia. And Middle East, of course, comes in second, and third would be South Asia, which would be mainly India. And last, of course, is Southeast Asia, which also has about close to 10% of the capacity, with Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, these countries having their own capacities, and they're being key exporters too. And in the map there, as you can see, Singapore, of course, is in red, and Singapore is exporting close to 2.5, 2.7 billion, and is a very strategic exporter for the region because Singapore barrels really flow everywhere from Northeast Asia to Southeast Asia to Oceania to all the different regions. And that's why the Singapore index holds a very key and strong hold as a benchmark for the region. Then, of course, there are other exporters too in that region, like Thailand, Malaysia. They do export also volumes, but not as much as Singapore in terms of how it exports to all the different directions. Then we have up north in Northeast Asia, the blue line that you can see, the arrows, that's South Korea. Of course, the major exporting country that South Korea exports to is China. Almost half of the production of Korea goes to China. And coming to Middle East, of course, the biggest exporter is Iran. And Iran also happens to be the biggest exporter for the region in terms of the sheer volume that it exports. And Iran not only exports in big bulk volumes, it also exports in smaller packages or drums, and is a very major big seller for this region. In terms of consumption, some of the key consuming countries, the first one, of course, is China. China is the biggest consumer, not only just in Asia, but overall in the world. China alone consumes about 1/3 of the global consumption. And then, of course, we have key emerging countries which does see a good share of growth, which I will talk about again later, is Vietnam, Indonesia, that's in Southeast Asia. Then India, of course, has a strong growth story. And UAE, of course, has its own little hubs in this part of the world, which also does buy and re-export cargoes to different locations. And then down under, we have Australia and New Zealand, which are also, Australia particularly is a large market and imports more than 90%, almost all its volumes that it consumes. New Zealand has also turned into a 100% importer and is a small market, but it's increasingly importing more. Coming to pricing and what some of the key drivers for this region. If you look at the Singapore bitumen prices, I will just explain the 4 lines that you can see here. On the top, of course, is ICE Brent, and that's the blue line. And then following that is the fuel oil 380 CST prices for Singapore. Then after that is FOB Singapore bitumen prices, and which is a light blue color line. And lastly, the black line is for FOB South Korea. So what you see here in the 2 red highlighted regions, you can see the sharp volatility that this region has seen in the past 2.5 years, when prices in Singapore had fallen to below 200 levels back in 2020 when COVID happened. And this year, again, with the rally that we have seen, especially after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and as the world was slowly coming out of the effects of the pandemic, we have seen the resurgence in prices, and we have seen FOB Singapore prices touch 600 and near to record high levels this year. Of course, market has retreated and has fallen since then, but it still remains fairly high priced in terms of the trend that we have seen through the year. And one of the big causes of why market has been so volatile and so sharp and strong, of course, the first factor was crude oil, which really rose by 63.2% from last year, 31st December to 8th March. Between that point, it went to $129 in March due to the impact of the war. And of course, since then, it has come back and is just a little bit bobbing close to the $100 level only and a little below that. And then we have HSFO prices, which also simultaneously rose by 62% during the similar period between December to March, and then again has fallen. So we've really seen steep volatility in terms of how these commodity prices not only have risen, but they have also fallen simultaneously too. And the rise in gas oil margins, which really touched record high levels, and the high HSFO prices, all of this has really impacted bitumen production in terms of the lower level of predictability in terms of how refineries can plan their production and what's really going to happen from a month-to-month basis. So all this has really taken away a lot of the stability and the predictability of the market. And demand, of course, has struggled in parts, and particularly in some of the more developing countries in the ASEAN region. India, then Australia, and there are whole different kinds of garden variety of reasons, be it prolonged bad weather, lots of floods in Australia, in the Brisbane side. Then we have also seen prolonged monsoon in India, which happened last year. Then lockdowns and pandemic-related restrictions. China is the first example that comes to mind. So all of that has still remained in the background and has slowed down in parts. And of course, budget issues is the latest that has come, and a lot of governments have struggled to really disburse funds, or we've been seeing in pockets slow implementation of the projects due to that. This is a look at the gas oil cracks and what really happened this year. And if you really see, gas oil cracks touched a record high of $70 per barrel, which is on the left-hand side, the left-hand chart. And you can see the orange line going there. And that was earlier part of this year. And since then, of course, it has come down heavily, as you can see there, too. So we have seen very, very high, strong gas oil margins, which of course incentivize refiners to produce more gas oil, and which does impact bitumen production. And then, of course, Chinese export quotas, we have seen from periodically the Chinese exporting more of the oil products into the region, and there's been more supply which has been coming out into the region, which has again flattened out the curves, the cracks in the past couple of months. And we have seen the cracks coming down and the refining margins also being lower in these past 2 months, which has again brought back some of the production which had earlier had been taken out of the market. Coming to more market-specific stuff regarding bitumen, and if we come to Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, China alone makes up 1/3 of the global demand, like I was saying earlier. And if you can see here, Northeast Asia demand is estimated to be about close to 38 million tons, and which is about 31% of the global demand. And global demand as of 2021 was at 121.7 million. And Chinese demand has been slow in 2021, but it has seen some pickup, particularly in the last few months. First half of 2022 was also slow, but we are starting to see slowly some interest and some projects coming back. People are restocking, and there's interest to implement some projects in some parts of China. But it's still the initial phase of the current 5-year plan that started last year. So we are in the second year of their current 5-year plan. So it is not expected to be really strong in terms of implementing new projects in China yet. It is expected to start from sometime next year. Then, of course, China has really battled with very stringent lockdowns this year, and that has impacted all commodities, not just bitumen. And China is still following through with the zero COVID policy, and hence that remains a concern still. And we have also seen steady refinery runs through 2020-21. 22 maybe less so, but the past 2 years, refinery runs have been fairly stable and high. Having said that, the Chinese market in terms of pricing has turned a bit more volatile this year. And some of the key factors, of course, we have seen that really impacted the prices in China. First, of course, is the domestic refinery prices, and we've seen the Shanghai Futures Exchange, which does react more closely with what happens with crude on a day-to-day basis. So we have seen some of the reactions also in terms of what's been happening on the day-to-day UN basis trading. Then the teapot refinery output and the production from the teapots, there's been some curtailment this year, which has managed to balance out the Chinese supplies in 2022. But 21, we had seen the refineries, teapot refineries, producing a lot of bitumen. And then, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, the 5-year plan and its progress and how it's implemented, which is supposed to kick off in full from sometime next year and pick up further through the next subsequent 2 years. And China has really battled a lot of shipping and logistic challenges, particularly with the ports. It's been an ongoing problem, and I think most traders or whoever is exporting into China do factor in the demurrage costs, on all the extra delays in terms of delivering cargoes. If you are going inside the Yangtze rivers, and a lot of shipping related problems have started, particularly in the East Chinese ports. So that has impacted particularly and affected the Korean barrels, which go into East China mostly. South China is lesser, so we don't see a lot of problems there. But lately there have been vessel availability problems, but hopefully that is not going to be a prolonged issue, and it's a temporary one. And then of course the COVID and its lockdowns has also seen that local demand has fallen through this year in periods. In this chart, what you can see here is primarily is the Chinese imports, which have fallen in 2021, and because of the first year of the current 5-year plan. And in 2022 also we do see up to the middle of the year. This of course is not reflective of the entire 8 months or 7 months that we are done with 22. But if you see for the first half itself, it was still below 2 million. And typically China imports close to 5 million tons. That's what the requirement is. But clearly, even when imports pick up, which is expected to do so now in the next current 4 months left of this year, unlikely it's going to hit the 5 million that was originally expected. Then port delays are of course impacting a lot of the trading and the delivery of cargoes into East China, which is the larger market. And Chinese refineries are continuing to run high in 2022 on improved margins. Coming to the Korean side of the story, I think Korea has really seen a very steady fall in exports. South Korea is one of those places where the refiners have gone through the upgradation of the distillation units, and it has resulted in a fall in overall bitumen production. And through the past 3 years, and it's expected to be even through 22, we have seen exports going down from all the way up to 4+ million tons back in 2018 and 17, down to barely 2 million tons, and below that into 22. And this particular slide shows you really the difference between Singapore and South Korea prices. And when we look at it, why is this important is because when the spread widens between these two key benchmark assessments in Northeast and Southeast Asia, we obviously do see the opportunities for arbitrage from Northeast Asia down to Southeast Asia. And this year we did see that this particular difference in prices widened to $75, allowing arbitrage to happen from Northeast to Southeast Asia. And this has obviously, one of the factors that happened was Singapore prices have remained at close to high 500s or almost $600 level, and that really has ensured that Singapore prices did not fall much, while Korean prices were more vulnerable to the fact that the Chinese demand has seen its ups and downs through this year, and hence that has resulted in Korean prices moving far more sharply than Singapore. Coming to some of the key markets in Southeast Asia that really draws notice, the first one that comes to mind is Vietnam. Vietnam has really emerged as the fastest growing market, and it has seen its imports grow anywhere between 10 to 20% year on year between 2017 to 20. And even in 2021 to 22, when their current 5-year plan, which they call Socio-Economic Development Plan, SEDP. It is also in the initial years like in China. So hence this year and last year demand was lower compared with 2020 when it hit 800,000 tons of imports. So Vietnam still remains ambitious in terms of implementing a lot of infrastructure development within the country. Barely about 11% or so of the land space are made into roads and highways. So, and they have a lot of projects in terms of developing airports and connecting highways, etc. So there's a lot of consumption which is still expected to come from this particular country, which is something to watch out for. In terms of imports, of course, Singapore remains as the biggest exporter to Vietnam. And particularly to South Vietnam. And then following that, we have seen increasing volume going from China to Vietnam. And then Korea, of course, which is the light blue section at the top, you can see Korean volumes also do go into mostly the northern part of Vietnam. And we have also seen particularly in the recent months, you can see the dark blue section on the 2020. And of course, this is showing only up to 2020, but even into 21 and 22, we have seen Middle East volumes also going occasionally there. But they are small volumes, limited volumes that go in there. Indonesia, which is really in terms of size, is a bigger market compared with Vietnam, but Indonesia also is one of the strongest economies in that region. But Indonesia's demand has really staggered because of the impact of COVID, and we have seen imports really plunge through 2020 and 21, as you can see here in this graph. And Singapore, of course, really sells majority of the volumes that go into Indonesia, and Malaysia is the next, which is in red in that section. And then you have a lot of other countries from Northeast Asia as well as Middle East that sell into Indonesia. And in 2022, we have seen Middle East imports really rise sharply. And I will show a slide shortly later because of the big gap that we have seen between the prices in Middle East versus those in Singapore. And we have seen how that arbitrage has really allowed a lot of people to move volumes into Southeast Asia. And Indonesia was one of the markets that took in a lot of the Middle East imports this year. Coming to Middle East and India, of course, Iran is really the biggest seller and producer of bitumen in this part of the world. And if you see this chart, Iran bitumen supply and demand, you can see that in terms of production, Iran has a capacity which of course is close to 6 million or above. But in terms of production, it comes to about close to a little over 5 million. And Iran, of course, is a biggest exporter in this region and exports more than 4 million tons of its export of the 5 million and over that it produces. And, but Iranian exports are also impacted by the fact that the rial does fluctuate a lot versus the dollar, and that impacts, of course, trading decisions on a day-to-day basis. Then the fact that the economic sanctions are still there, although there are talks going on as of even now that it's going to be eased, that is still there in the background, but nothing final or definitive has happened yet. And here in this particular chart, what you can see here is the FOB Singapore prices versus FOB Iran. That's the dark blue line. That's really the spread. And what you can see at the right at the end is the spread had gone to as much as $250, and the gap had gone as big as that. So if you look at the spread between Singapore and Iran, it went to that high. But you look back, it has a historic high levels. And it kind of tells you then that obviously the opportunity to export at this point is really big for those who are selling from Middle East into Asia. And then if you look at the Singapore prices versus Bahrain, it's also quite wide. It's about $100, but the spread with Iran is even much wider. Hence, we have seen regular exports going into Southeast Asia from Middle East. So Iran really makes up the more than 1/3 of the capacity, and Middle East, and of course Iran, the more than half of the exports from Iran go to India particularly. About 48% of the exports is consumed by South Asia, with India being the major buyer. And following that, of course, it's Middle East in this region itself, whether it's Oman or UAE. Some of these markets also take in cargoes from Iran and they re-export into other regions. And then Africa takes in about 10% and Southeast Asia another 3% or so. And the spot liquidity is really highest for Iranian cargoes, whether be it in bulk or drums. And it's really one of the most active and dynamic markets in this region. The kind of prices that we had seen in the early part of the year, when you look at the chart on the right-hand side, that just shows you the prices for FOB Iran bulk, FOB Iran drums, and the domestic Mumbai prices. And the Mumbai domestic prices are usually nominated by the refiners there. And what you can see here, that in the dark blue line, prices had gone above 400 somewhere about 2-3 months back. And since then, of course, market has fallen sharply. And we are just somewhere in the 300, mid 300, close to mid 300 levels. So Iran prices are, we do see a lot of sharp movements up and down. And one of the big factors that really pushed down prices in the last couple of months has been the fact that demand has fallen from June because of the onset of the monsoon in India and the consumption from India being less. It has also, of course, resulted in more supply now being available. Coming to India, and India, of course, has really been quite resilient in terms of the comeback that it made through 2021 and 22 in terms of the GDP growth. And after seeing negative growth in 2020, it really came back. And India still remains a strong growth story despite the challenges that the country faces in terms of budget or implementation, whether be it import or pricing. But India still is expected to see growth through the coming few years. And infrastructure development is still a key factor for the government, and it's a key focus. And 5% of the 2022 financial budget was allocated for road construction and for highways. And Bharatmala Pariyojana, which was one of the flagship initiatives launched by the government to build a lot of roads across the country. It was due to end in March 2022, but has seen a lot of delays, part of the reason being COVID and the long lockdowns that India faced in the past 2 years. And only 20% of the road length has really been constructed through this period, and the whole project looks now delayed all the way until 26 to 27. And of course, the repeated lockdowns has been a major cause. But Indian bitumen consumption still is expected to jump, and by 11% it jumped through 2020 and 21 despite lockdowns, everything. Prolonged monsoon season that affected India last year, that really derailed the peak paving season, which we usually see from September all the way until January or so. All that was thrown off because of the long monsoon that they faced. Budget issues are still impacting a lot of implementation, but India still is expected to see a lot of growth. And Indian imports have been rising, and if you see up to 2021, it had gone all the way up to 2.5 million. And Indian imports jumped by 15.7% in 2021. In conclusion, I think, of course, Asia is still expected to see periodic supply tightness if production cuts happen. But strong refined products cracks have kept bitumen production under some pressure. And demand still continues to be a challenge because of the variety of reasons that seem to be affecting all the markets that I explained just now. And of course, in the larger picture, we still are in the midst of the recessionary impact of the pandemic and what's been happening in the past few years. So the high inflation and all these factors continue to pressure both sellers and buyers. And in the Middle East, geopolitics remains a key factor that needs to be watched, with the continued talks of easing the sanctions on Iran, which is really being watched closely by the market. Thank you. Any questions, I'm happy to take.